All right, well, let's jump into our discussion, continuing from last week, Romans 14 into 15. I left all of our notes from last week up on the board for easier reference, and I just want to make sure that we catch ourselves up to speed just a little bit, especially defining some terms. When Paul uses the terms weak and strong, are these meant to be descriptive terms? Is he describing one as a weak brother and the other one as a strong brother in the way that we think of it? No, I don't think these are meant to be descriptive of the brother. I think these are classification terms, that he's just talking about those on the one side who are a certain way, and then these are a certain way, and it's based on what? Okay. Okay. Okay, so the Jews had the law, is what Sharon was saying, so they have a constraint, and then the Gentiles, again though, using the term, they're stronger, which again kind of takes it out of simply classification into descriptive, and saying, well, they are stronger. When we think of strong, weak, one's better than, less than, as the case might be. But Sharon, I think, is spot on that this really comes to an understanding of liberties. So they understand the liberties that they have, and over here, they are held back from those liberties by their understanding of what God wants them to do or be, according to what? According to the law of Moses. And Paul writes to say to these Jews, hey, y'all realize the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. You're done with it. Move on and do what you're supposed to do, right? No, that's not what he tells them. There's no teaching that says that the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. It's done. It's finished. If you're a Jew, forget it. Leave it behind. Many Jews continue to follow the law of Moses. Does that mean they have to? If they're a Jew, do they have to continue? No, they do not have to continue to abide by the law of Moses, but they were perfectly at liberty to continue to do so if they conscientiously felt that they were supposed to, so long as what? They understood that it wasn't, Kelly said it wasn't what saved them, or justification is not found in the works of the law of Moses. It is only found by faith in Christ, right? So this is our discussion. We talked about matters of faith versus matters of opinion, and in this discussion, is there going to be something, scratch that. Is this discussion about the Daniel diet or the Sabbath day, is this a discussion that is only a matter of opinion and not a matter of faith? Yes or no? No, thank you. Because to one side, over here, this is a matter of faith. If they eat the things that are unclean, they have sinned in their understanding. If they do not honor the Sabbath, they have sinned in their understanding. And so it becomes, the whole conversation on both sides becomes then a matter of faith. And that's important for us to understand. There is one more term that I did not discuss last week that gets bandied around in this discussion that I wanted to. And that is the word, I'm running out of space to throw random things. All right, now, those of you reading this, and you guys are all into March Madness and basketball and everything, Selection Sunday is coming up this Sunday, one of the most important days of the entire year. some of the best. So you may be thinking that says offense. That's the emphasis is on the wrong syllable there. This is an offense, is what we're talking about. How many of you guys have heard of the discussion of an offense or being offended in Romans 14? And unfortunately, even though this term gets used in the discussion, whether in 1 Corinthians, Romans, or the whole discussion, this term, do not cause your brother offense, or do not offend your brother. Why do we have to be careful with this word? I mean, he uses it, right? Why do we have to be careful? Bruce?
It's easy to offend people. I was in line today at Lowe's buying something, and I happened to, the discussion came up about inflation, and I said, well, it must be Joe Biden's inflation, it's not mine.
Okay, but all that aside, I don't want to go down a path or go into discussion of politics, anything like that.
I'm explaining about offense, okay? Apparently, I offended him with something I said, and
right.
I didn't even realize that. And we can do that with our brothers in Christ as well.
Right, but in all actuality, you are giving a perfect example of why we need to be careful, because what Bruce just said, that's the way that we think of this word and this term, right? That we make somebody else uncomfortable, that we've done something that someone else doesn't like. Is that what Paul means when he uses this term? What is he referring to? Okay, yeah, the microphone is coming. Sharon, I want you to expound on that. You said sinning or stumbling.
Right, he doesn't want us to do something that would cause a person to sin,
Yes.
stumble. I don't know how much you want me to explain.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that is exactly right. The offense that Paul is discussing is the same thing that Jesus talks about when he talks about causing any of these little ones to stumble, right? It'd be better for them, remember he said, if they put a millstone around the neck, throw himself in the sea, than to cause someone to stumble. That's what's under discussion. We're not talking about saying something or doing something that's uncomfortable, saying something or doing something that someone just doesn't like. Say, hey, you offended me by that statement. We're talking about doing something or saying something by which your action directly results in somebody else violating their conscience and what they say or do. Does that make sense? The difference? He's talking about causing someone else to do something that they should not do. That's what's under discussion. And so as Bruce brought up in his illustration, that's a common way of understanding the word offense or offend, which muddles this whole conversation because that's not what Paul's talking about. He's talking about doing something and causing your brother to do something that they believe they should not be doing. All right, let me make sure. Okay. All right, so that gets us through all of these terms here. Questions on offended, being offended, offense, how that fits into the discussion, or further comments? All right, so now let me do some damage control from last week as we kind of stepped into a discussion that was meant to do one thing and kind of did something else. That is the discussion where I brought up situational ethics. And I want to make sure that it's known and understood that the base concept of situational ethics has to do with something being right or wrong to different people based on their situation. I mean, that's the base concept or base idea. Mike was kind of going into this, talking about it, and making sure that we're very clear what we are and are not discussing from this. And so I'm going to take just a moment to explain a little bit of teaching theory that I abide by that might make what I do make a little bit more sense. How many of you guys are familiar with the word? I have to look at it to make sure because it's a weird word. Disequilibration. Disequilibration. How many of you guys have used that in the last week? Nobody? Oh, okay. All right. Disequilibration, it's the opposite of equilibration. Basically, equilibration is where you're planted and everything's solid, you're nice, and you're comfortable. Disequilibration is where you are off a little bit. It's like a vertigo type of a feeling in your mind, and you are stumbling just a little bit. And teaching-wise, it is very helpful if you're able to create disequilibration in a person's mind, because as long as they're firmly planted and solid, they don't have to think as much. They're like, oh, just tell me what I already know, feed me what I've already eaten, and I don't have to think, I don't have to grow. But if you can cause someone to be off kilter just a little bit, it causes them to start questioning, challenging, and thinking. And you'll see, I do this probably, you've noticed, I do this a lot in sermons or classes or things. And last week was an example where maybe I did it the wrong way by bringing up something that, as Mike said, carries an awful lot of baggage that I didn't intend to bring into the conversation. So, just wanted to make it very clear, I am not advocating a wholesale acceptance of everything that is situational ethics. Does everybody understand that? Simply brought it up so that you would hear the words. I think Mike and I had a conversation last week afterward. He used the word shock value because that's what disequilibration really is. It's creating a shock value by which people have to stop and say, wait, what? Hold on. Let me think now. But it was unnecessary. It really was for the discussion. And I apologize for dragging us too far in that direction. So Mike was perfectly on point to stop things and say, hey, let's talk about this very quickly and make sure that we're not advocating something that we should not be advocating. All right. Is that all good on that discussion? Mike, are we good? We're good. Okay. I mean, we were good last week. I know. But just yeah, right. If you didn't hear Mike, he said right after you met me out back. And just so you guys know, he may be 70 years old, maybe older than 70 now. I don't know. I still would not meet him out back. I think he could still take me, even at that point. So don't worry about anything like that actually happening. So, all right. Now let's talk about how to actually make practical application of these things we talked about, because this is one application of this to the Jews and to the Gentiles. And there is a sense in which we could say, and we would have every right to say it, and I have talked to some people who do actually kind of say this, kind of believe this in discussions, that unless we are dealing with a problem that stems from people coming out of Judaism and us not being Jews and issues that are created, unless we fit this, we really cannot make true application of Romans 14. And that's fair. That is a fair assessment. I would, though, say from there, why would we have the same principle in 1 Corinthians? In fact, I did say, why would we have the same principle in 1 Corinthians chapters 8, 9, and 10, which is not about Jews and Gentiles. It's about Gentiles who came out of idolatry and the way that they're now accepting or not accepting things that have to do with that idolatry, why would we have the same principles? It seems to me that there's a larger principle that's being used. It goes beyond Jew-Gentile relationships. And so how then do we make application? Did anybody by chance, and if you didn't, that's okay, but did anybody by chance read the Bulletin article this weekend? Use the article of Romans 14 in the mid example, perhaps how it is that we could make application for our own studies and what it is that we're doing. And the article itself, for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to read through it, had to do with proper use of hands in worship. Can you lift holy hands in worship or show emotion, the saying of amens, things such as that? If you're singing and somebody wanted to sway with a hand in the air, is that distracting? Is that bad to do? Do we have biblical authorization to use something such as that? And really, I came down and said, the New Testament doesn't care. It's not something that they're focused on. Nobody really talks about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do with your hands or with anything during the worship service. There's hardly anything about what happens in the worship service at all. It's not there. So it basically was saying, if you feel as if you should be doing that you have the liberty to do that, then do it. If you feel constrained and you conscientiously think there's a problem with doing that, then don't do it. Especially don't do it if you actually think that it's wrong to do such a thing. Because then you would be guilty of sinning by doing the very thing that this guy over here is not guilty of doing, right? So that's just one example of how to apply this. I guess let me throw this out. I need to keep tabs on time because I've got two major things that I want to talk about. But let me throw this out. How many of y'all have been in classes talking about Romans 14 and you made a list of things that are covered under Romans 14? Have y'all done? Nobody? Really? Oh, that's interesting. I thought all the hands were going to go up. Like, well, yeah, duh, that's what you do when you're studying Romans 14. I remember doing that all the time when I was a kid and in various classes and things where they'd write a list on the board, can you serve in the military? That's Romans 14. Do you have to wear a head covering? That's Romans 14. That's Romans 14. That's Romans 14. And just a whole list of things that cannot be discussed. Well, okay. I thought we were going to have this discussion. I don't think we need to have this discussion. If you've never really been through a class that does that, I don't want to start now because I think that kind of misses the point of this. But before we do move on, yes, Sharon, the microphone is coming.
I have a question.
Yep.
I read your article, and it took me a moment until you started talking about it. I kept reading it and thinking tradition, and not so much scripture, but tradition. So for me, it's trying to figure out what's a command, and I think clearly I know certain commands are. And then the rest, should I let something that's probably a tradition or seen by some, maybe more restrictive, bother me? And I guess that's my question is, those are the guidelines. I don't know for whether somebody says amen, like you talked one day on Sunday, about men or women saying amen publicly, or whether they hold up their hands in prayer, or anything like that.
Yeah, very good. Part of that would, first of all, fall into having to understand that it is tradition. For an individual who does not fully grasp that it is tradition, for them, they firmly believe that this is biblical principle based on their understanding of biblical authority, where if it has not been specifically allowed, then you should not be doing it. And for them to do so, they would say, well, I would consider this sinning because we have no authority for that particular prayer posture or action or something, whatever the case is. They would have to first recognize that it's simply tradition, and that would be actually part of the process to go from one side to the other. Because once you realize and you recognize, okay, this isn't bound by God the way that I thought that it was, then you start to say, okay, now I can see both sides. You're kind of in the middle, and then you say, I think I have a liberty to do that. You are able to switch sides, as the case might be. But for someone who doesn't realize it's just a matter of tradition, for them, it could be sinful to do it. If they believe it's sinful to do it, and they do it, then they have sinned. And that's kind of the message from Romans 14. You can take something that you have absolute liberty to do, and you can make it sinful by not understanding the liberty that you have. Does that kind of answer the question? Yeah, that was an excellent question, by the way. I probably should have put that discussion on here in my notes for us to talk about, because that's a really important of that. Let me throw that out there because I just gave an answer, but some of you all might have some thoughts on that discussion. Anybody wanting to weigh in? Any pushback on that or challenges or? No. Mm-hmm.
And they go to that person and say, what you're doing, I don't understand, and I find it distracting during worship.
Yep.
Do you need to do that? Then that person who's doing it would have to, I think, consider whether that's more important to do this or to be concerned with the feelings of the person who spoke to them.
All right, very good. Now that transitions, I think, very well into what is it that the one side is supposed to do and what is it that the other side is supposed to do in these situations. Now, let's take Sharon's. Did everybody hear Sharon? That one person goes to another and says, hey, what you're doing is very distracting. You're sitting there swaying in front of me with your hands in the air like you just don't care, right? And you're just, and I can't do that. Now, here's the question. Is that a legitimate complaint to make according to this discussion? Kelly? Why not? Okay, you being distracted. All right, you want to say that again since he made the trek all the way back there?
Let's say, I don't know. I'm not going to pick on anybody. Somebody distracting me in worship it's not a sin.
Yes.
That's in my head.
Yep.
Like doesn't matter if the baby's crying. Great, I'm glad it's here. That's not a sin.
Yeah, if you believe that it's wrong to do this, and there's somebody doing this, and you want to go to them and say, would you please stop because it's distracting, are you being tempted or enticed to do something that you believe is wrong? Are you being tempted to do that yourself? No. You're asking them to stop doing it because you don't like it. You're not being tempted to join in and say, well, I guess I have to do this, but boy, this just feels wrong to do it, right? In that scenario, that's not a Romans 14 complaint. That comes down to the one side not what? Not judging, and the other side not despising or being annoyed by. You say, you know what? If that's the way you're going to honor God in your worship, honor God that way. For me, I will honor God in my worship this way. And that's what it boils down to. There is not in that instance a requirement that says, because I feel uncomfortable by something, or I feel like you shouldn't be doing that you are doing to honor God, I don't have the right to come to you and say, stop doing that, so that I don't feel uncomfortable anymore. And if I do, I may have the discussion, but you don't have to stop doing it just because I feel like you shouldn't be doing it. Does that make sense? All right. Now, push back on that. By the way, Sharon, thank you very much for this discussion, because you're really hitting in on, I think, a lot of what this discussion is. Sue, the microphone is on its way. Yes, go ahead.
Well, if you don't like it, you can always move.
I'm sorry, what?
If you don't like it, you can move where you're not going to be distracted.
Yeah, go sit in front of them, right?
Yeah.
Then you won't even know it. Yeah, very good. There are other ways for you to find a way to be in a good relationship with everybody that's here. So I think you are exactly right. It's not fully exactly, but you know how do you get from complaint to compliant? I have to move, right? You just move the I. You go from complaint to compliant. The I has to move. That's all it takes. And sometimes it's just that simple. If I move, change something, do something different, then everything ends up just fine. All right, very good. Thank you. And I think that's kind of getting to the heart of what we're talking about. The issue, though, with trying to enumerate all of the situations, all the things that fall into Romans 14, is you're now creating a list of all of the division points, right? You're saying, here's our dividing points. These are our official ones, and let's focus on all the things that divide us for a little bit. You want to do that? Do you guys want to talk about all the things that we have divisions on? No. It's kind of pointless. And for a lot of it, usually it's things that aren't really an issue with the church itself. Now, what we need to make sure is we understand the principle so that, let's just say at some point, and not that this will happen, but let's say Julia was like, you know what, ladies, I think we should all be wearing head coverings. And she puts one on, she hands one out to everybody else in the church because she says, you need to be wearing a head covering. Well, now we've got a real live case that exists, and that we say, okay, let's run this, our Romans 14 principle filter. Make sense? You deal with the different issues as they come up, but you understand and you learn the principle first so that you are ready to apply it when necessary. Yeah, Whitney?
Would provide the head coverings, not if somebody wanted to wear one for themselves and you just ignored it, I guess.
Yeah, if somebody feels that Paul is teaching that a woman has to wear a head covering, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, she can do that. Not a problem. She does it for herself because that's her relationship with God. But as Whitney says, it only becomes the issue when she starts binding it on everyone else and judging them if they don't also abide by it, because for her, again, you guys understand, Julia is not, this is totally hypothetical, right? You know, like, oh man, Julia, Are you really like leaning towards head coverings? No, it's not that at all. But in the one instance, she's trying to bind it on others. Microphone down here. She's trying to bind it on others in a way that would be wrong to do so. Sharon?
Done into that equation is if she tries to bind us to do that, then there is a problem, and that's when we have elders.
Yep.
That's where it's addressed at.
Yeah, man.
It's not us getting petty against each other. If it becomes that big, then it needs to be an elders matter.
All right. That is excellent. I just want to make sure everyone knows I did not send an email to Sharon saying, hey, at this certain moment, can you bring this up? Because she's segueing everything so perfectly. This is one of the big ones that I wanted to make sure that we talked about. What do we do about the leadership of the church? Because we have elders who are put over us to shepherd the flock here, right? Romans 14, let me put it this way. Could somebody use Romans 14 in order to take over the leadership of a church? How so? How would that happen? How could someone use Romans 14? Mike, you have a thought? Go for it.
Oh, basically, they can take the most restrictive view on everything and then drive everything that direction. Mm-hmm. And they can say, I'm offended, mm-hmm. And it's offending others, therefore, and it just becomes more and more restrictive. So it takes some doing sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Romans 14 is not placed in the context of a congregation to the eldership. And I think it's important that we understand that. That is a separate dynamic that's put into place, and it does not follow the rules of Romans 14. And because there's a totally different dynamic that needs to be done. Therefore, and as Mike said, you could have a certain person or a certain subset, a very small minority, who every time a decision needs to be made, all they have to do is go to the elders and say, if you do X, Y, or Z, this is going to cause me to sin, or this is going to do this, that, or the other. I will be offended by this. And if Romans 14 is specifically placed in that context, immediately the elders have to make what decision? Who do they have to side with? The ones who came to them. The weak, remember, not that they're weak in the faith, but a classification. The ones on this side who said, hey, Romans 14, and now who has become the leaders of the church? It's that group who always goes to the elders, always says, if you do this, then, and the elders always will bow down to what it is that they're requesting. And they become the de facto leaders of the church. That's not the dynamic that this is discussing. This is talking about individuals to each other. Right? This is talking about the interplay between people within the church. The elders are set in a place of leadership for a reason. Why? Why are they there? To lead? Is that what? Yeah, Bruce?
They're set like a rudder on a ship. I mean, they're supposed to steer the church towards the true path in the Bible.
Yeah, they have been placed in the position that they are as leaders because the church has looked at them and said, I trust your leadership. And they are leading. A shepherd, stands out in front of the flock and goes, and the sheep follow their leadership. That's the idea. A church, when it comes right down to it, is not a democracy. One man, one vote does not work. It is very, very heavily dependent upon those who have proven themselves over the test of time, and they have come out, and you look at them and say, I trust what you have to say. Therefore, I'm placing you in this position, and I will follow you. Therefore, they have to make the difficult decisions. They have to do the things that are better, not for one, two, a small subset of the group, but what is best for the entire church as a whole. Their interest is in every single individual who is here, and it's not their job to cater to the one or the two or the small minority who is going to try to steer things in a different direction. Does that make sense? So, that's their role, and they need to fulfill their role, even if it means that there are some people who are going to be disappointed. In fact, if you make a decision between two groups, some people are going to be disappointed, right? That comes with the territory, that comes with the job. But Romans 14 is not their guiding principle of leadership. All right. Push back on that one. What do you guys think? You guys are awfully quiet tonight. Except for Sharon. She's coming in at just the right moments to segue for me. Yeah.
I think they can use Romans 14 to say this individual that's coming to them, is it really a sin for all, or is it just you making that a sin?
Yep.
And that's a judgment call. And then there's not just one elder, there's more than one. So there's not that persuasion that goes into effect.
Yep. And that is exactly it. There are so many more factors that are at play and that they have to take into account that you may not even realize. So, all right, obviously there's more to that discussion. What do you do if you really feel like the eldership is making some severe mistakes, mishaps, some problems? How do you handle that? How do you talk about that? What do you do? All of that. Yeah, absolutely. There's a discussion there. That's a separate discussion. That's not a Romans 14 discussion. That's a church to eldership type of a discussion. And we'll have those, by the way. We'll definitely talk about those things. I also think it's important that we understand this does not mean that we sweep everything under a rug. You may understand, going back to what Sharon before, you may understand that what you're dealing with is simply a tradition. Or you may really believe that somebody going like this is wrong for them to do so. So does Romans 14 mean that you never talk to a person who's doing this about it? What do y'all think? No. Why not? All right.
If it doesn't rise to the level of offense, so be it. And let's say I come to you, I'm like, hey, Chris, I really don't think you need to be wearing turtlenecks. They're really pretentious. And we talk about it, and you disagree, and I'm like, well,
Okay.
I'm
Look,
right,
man,
Chris.
are you bringing this up again? We've had this conversation. How many times now?
Yeah. Yep. So then And so then I'm supposed to bring a couple of people with me that are not biased, and they're going to sit down and be like, Kelly, you're being an idiot. It's okay for him to have a turtleneck, even though he looks ridiculous in it. Okay.
Yep.
So and they'll set me straight. But there's a process. We talked about this a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Where if I got a problem, if I think you're sinning or you're sinning against me, I have a duty to talk to you, and there's a process for settling it without jumping into Romans 14.
All right. That was a fantastic answer, other than the turtleneck comments. But that is exactly right. That we have a system in place that we can delineate, is this something that needs to be, is it not? But go up and talk to the individual. If you see someone and you genuinely believe they're doing something that is sinful, have the conversation. Talk to them about it. Don't just say, well, someone needs to address this. No. Have the conversation. It has to happen. No church is going to be perfect without just, problems, right? Without things that are right underneath the level, disputes, things like that. But here's the thing. They have to be discussed. They can't just sit and fester. If there's an issue between people, you have to have the conversation. And if you need be, as Kelly said, you have to have the conversation bringing in one or two more people. But at that point, this type of scenario should die, right? When they say, okay, look, all right, the whole turtleneck thing, not that big a deal, right? Or the whole hand swaying in the air thing while you're singing, that's simply a traditional thing. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, don't do it. But there's nothing biblically wrong with John Hayford doing this while he's singing, right? We might think it looks weird for him to be doing it right up there in the front, doing this while singing. But there's nothing biblically wrong with doing that. And if he's doing that to honor God, he's doing that to honor God. And you have to leave it there. But discussions have to be had. A group cannot grow in grace and in love with one another if we don't talk to each other about the things that could potentially be divisive. Does that make sense? So, this is really important to say, well, you know what? I think this, but Romans 14, I'm just going to let it go. No, don't let it go. Have the conversation. And then Romans 14, let it go. Right? Because someone else may not have any clue or any idea that they are affecting you the way that they are, and they may end up agreeing with you. And they may say, you know what, you bring up a valid point. Maybe I am in the wrong on this, or whatever. Have the discussion. All right, we are nearly out of time. All right, I'm just going to basically bring this down to a phrase here. Man, I cannot find it. This is really annoying because I thought it was right here, but it's not right where I thought it was. Anyway, there's a phrase, do the things that make for peace. This whole discussion is about bringing us to a point of peace. So if we are throwing around this discussion, throwing around Romans 14, it's like a little badge, shoving it in people's faces, saying, I can do what I want, Romans 14, or things or whatever the case is, and all we're doing is creating division within the group, then we're completely missing the point. And we're not doing what Paul says to do. The whole point of this, the whole point of the letter, the polemic through the letter, everything was this. Do the things that make for peace. Yeah, Lorraine? Probably.
For peace and
Yep.
building up of one another.
Yep, that's exactly it. I thought it was later in the chapter is where I was looking. Actually, I thought it was in chapter 15. But yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Lorraine. Yep, chapter 14, verse 19. Pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. That's the end goal. It's not, I'm going to get mine, I'm going to do whatever I want, I don't care about you. It's, what can I do that will create peace among everybody? That's the goal of this chapter. All right, questions or comments from anybody? All right, this concludes our Romans discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed these two as much as I enjoyed these 2 quarters. I thought it was a great discussion, great participation. Thank you all very much for that. And now if you want to mock me mercilessly for my turtleneck or anything else related to the class, feel free. We can always have any more pushback or discussions that you want to have. But again, thank you very much.